Now, as you know, because I was introduced as a retired political science professor, you might figure out that I'm pretty good at giving lectures. Now, lectures and sermons are different. One of the major differences is that a lecture is longer. I'm used to giving 50-minute lectures, and I'm told if I do that, you might get grumpy. And given that it's 5 minutes to 11, this is going to be a very short sermon. I got into this issue through the back door. As you know, I was elected to serve on the board of trustees for the Santa Barbara Community College District. We have 3 campuses. We spend $100 million of your money every year in support of 17,000 students, and that keeps me off the streets. And I was interested in why Hispanic students in particular were not succeeding at mathematics, and they were failing at a horrible rate. 65% were failing, and so our faculty, which is the best faculty on the planet, please understand, I really believe that, they put together a program called Express for Success, and they were able to, by focusing attention on the students, by caring deeply about them, by helping them form into a community so that they would start helping themselves, by providing tutors and mentors and making sure that they really got it. They did it. 92% success rate. So we know how to do it. We just have to have the resources. Hence, my search for resources. I started looking through California's budget. Now that's a daunting task. It's a very thick document. And I came across this notion of recidivism. That's a really fancy word. It means people who complete their sentence and then go back into prison within a 3-year period of release. And the number struck me as gargantuan. 70% of our prison inmates rotate back into the prison system within 3 years. That is, they reoffend, they are apprehended, they are tried, and they go back in. 70%. I like to look at things as a teacher the other way around. What's the success rate? 30%. Well, anywhere that I have taught where a student receives 30%, that's still a failure of gargantuan proportions. And I wonder why we aren't a little more upset, frankly. Because not only do we fail, we're failing as human beings to engage their minds in such a way that they leave as better citizens of the world. America has a unique distinction. We represent 5% of the world's population and 25% of its inmates. Let that one sink in. California is not the leading state, but we are about mid-level, and we have 133,000 inmates in the state of California. This wasn't always the case. I mean, Holly said that we now have 2.3 million people. As of 1975, we had less than 500,000 inmates. And from 1975 on, you see the spike going like this. What happened? We invented the politically expedient model of lock them up and 3 strikes, you're out. And in they went. By contrast, it costs $8,600 to send a student to City College. Money well spent. The California State University system costs $14,000. The University of California spend about $34,000 per year. None of them comes close to the cost of recidivism, which is, care to guess? $95,000 per recidivist per year. Just think about that for a while. So it occurred to me, basically I wanted that money. I thought I can do better with it. I can spend it on education and help I help this next generation stay out. I mean, the mission of the college, particularly of a community college, is to lift up that segment of society that feels marginalized and in perpetual poverty. Why? Because perpetual poverty translates to the absence of hope. If you know that you're poor and you're going to stay poor, you have no hope. And then what do? When I was young, I was poor. My mother and I would sometimes get together and pile all of the money in the world that we had in order to make next month's rent and still come out $5 short. I knew I was poor, but I knew it was not permanent. And that's the difference. So I started looking at alternatives. And there are lots of alternatives. And the ones that attracted me most were those in Scandinavia, where the recidivism rate was considerably lower. Norway's, for example, is around 20%. I remind you, ours is 70. And I wanted to explain the difference to myself. And so I made arrangements to go to Denmark this summer and be admitted to prison. And I didn't have to spend a lot of time there. It was much too short. But I wanted more than just to read about it. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to see how it would be. A new occupant of a Danish, I should mention that there's both an open and a closed prison in Denmark. The closed prison is one designed for people who have a high risk of being violent. It doesn't matter what they did. In either case, if they're violent, they go over here. If they're not violent, if the risk factor is low, they go into the open prison. And an open prison is exactly what the word means. Horsawa prison has now, it's 100 years old. They've just finished putting a fence around it. Not to keep the prisoners in, but to keep others out. And there's a gate that's open all day. And I guess they close it at night, and sometimes they forget. So prisoners can really go if they want to go, and they are quickly apprehended again, and there are consequences for bad behavior. And so very rarely does anybody leave an open prison. There's a 2-week introduction to prison life that each inmate goes through. And they learn from their guards/mentors that, we're going to work on this. We need for you to understand what happened to you and why it happened to you and how you can get transformed into where you want to be and who you want to be. And we're going to work on that together. And there's a team function at work here based on a whole lot of trust. I asked one prison guard, her name was BB, I asked her, if somebody came to you and told you something in confidence, would you keep that confidence? And she said, absolutely. Unless it was, unless my keeping that confidence increased the risk of violence within the prison. But trust is a key element to success in the prison. Other elements of success were all around me. Inmates had rooms, not cells. There were doors, not bars. There were 2 locks on the doors. One lock was for the warden. That was the top lock. The bottom lock was for the inmate. He had a key. During the day, the top lock was open. At night, the top lock was closed. You were in jail. You were being punished for something, and they defined punishment very strictly by saying it is a suspension of your liberty. That's it. There's nothing else. We don't have to treat you harshly once you're in here. And there's a very practical reason for that. What we have discovered in our own experience is that by treating people harshly, they come out harshly. We help them learn how to be mean and vicious and so forth. And so it's counterproductive. And so in Denmark, they don't do it. They're also taught responsibility. Nobody's going to do your laundry. If you want to do your laundry, you have to do your laundry. and nobody's going to fix your meals. And the good part of that is nobody complains about the food, because you are responsible for making your own food. The grocery truck comes around every day, and you can buy fresh produce from the grocery truck, and you fix your own meals with your own money. Oh, and you're expected to work. And if you don't know anything, you're trained. They go through this counseling process and figure out, what do you really want to do? And let's say you wanted to be a carpenter. They had a wonderful carpentry shop. I love tinkering with carpentry, and I almost volunteered to stay for a while. And they learn. They make furniture, and they're paid. That's the other value. They're paid at the same rate inside as they would be paid outside. None of this $1.25 an hour thing. So it's expensive, but they earn money, and they're encouraged to save their money, and they're encouraged not to spend all of it, so that when they leave prison, they have at least 15% of their resources left with which to make the transition. So they make their own food, and they have a common kitchen with all of the elements of food making that you would have in your kitchen, including knives. Thought I'd get to that point first. And rarely is there an incident. And when there is an incident, they fix it. In one open prison, somebody did use a knife to try to hit somebody, and what they did was tether the knife to the chopping block. So there's still a knife, it's just you can't take it with you. Your rooms are yours. The prison guard asked very courteously one of the prisoners if it would be okay if I was invited in. So I was in, yes, please come in. And I spoke with him, and I spoke with a number of other prisoners sitting around the camp. They also do all of the upkeep on the inside of the prison grounds. They do it themselves, and it adds a dimension of pride in having a beautiful facility. So very different, so very different. They develop a sense of community. They have they decide themselves what's going to happen by way of activity within the prison system. Prison guards can be a part of the community and a part of the conversation, but they don't dominate. They just listen, and they participate. And of course there are limits to what can be decided by these communities, but you begin to develop a sense of responsibility for each other, for your community, perhaps a sense of community that never happened for them before that time. In all cases, there's an effort to attain what they call normalcy. That is, whatever happens on the inside should be a reflection of what happens outside. That's why they got to the point of saying, okay, equal pay for equal work. It isn't just gender-based, it's on this side as well as that side of the fence. William Rensman is the architect of this system, and I talked to him at length one afternoon, and he said, you know, we basically asked two questions. The first question is, how would they do this outside? Once we have the answer to that, we ask ourselves the second question. Is there any reason why we shouldn't do it this way on the inside? And if the answer is no, that's how we do it. There's an effort to create a balance of normalcy between the fence, both inside and outside. As a consequence, the transition is not harsh. In California state prisons, the difference is huge. And the release is often traumatic, contributing to this recidivism process. So the operable assumption that I observed in Denmark is that they have accepted this sense of inherent worth and dignity of every person. Inherent. It means it's a birthright. It isn't something that we earn as we go along. And it cannot be suspended just because you get into prison. And that seems to be a lesson that we might want to relearn. Ultimately, the bottom line is this: can we apply it here? Can we apply some of the things that I learned in Denmark and in Norway here? There are a lot of counter arguments. One of them is, it'll never work here because it's just not an American idea. And I heard this from state legislators. These are educated people. Yeah, I think. And then I was reminded that in 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote this famous book about democracy in America, came to this country exploring America's prison system. Isn't that interesting? It was a ruse on his part. He didn't really mean it. He came here in order to learn about our culture. And one of the elements of that culture was what he called a self-conscious Americanism. That is a rejection of anything that was not created here. And surely nothing that is worthwhile could have possibly been created anywhere else. Alexis de Tocqueville, 1831. So it's not a new thing. And folks, we have to get over it. It's time we benefited from the trials and errors of others. In Europe, there's a 14-member consortium where they exchange ideas about how to conduct incarceration every day of the week. We're not part of that consortium. If we're going to make this switch, we have to do a number of different things. One is, and this is the most difficult, it's a cultural shift. We have to move from our perception that the thing to do about punishment is to be as harsh as possible, be as mean as possible, have lengthy sentencing, and participate in the creation of monsters. No, but the shift has to be that we move from the punitive to the rehabilitative. We have to, it's a simple, pragmatic assumption that I make, that rehabilitation can work. We tried it in the 70s, it didn't work because we didn't provide sufficient resources to it. And so it failed, and therefore everybody gave up on it, and we had an enormous spike from less than 500,000 population to over 2 million in population in custody. So we begin with the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I think that's a very simple assumption. And it isn't just a Unitarian Universalist idea. This is rooted in our founding parents. I was going to say fathers, but with heavy input from Abigail Adams. So we also have to review our sentencing practices. We love long sentences. And to be sure, once somebody is behind bars, they're not going to be out creating havoc. But they are going to be creating internal havoc. And that's the part we can't afford. In Denmark, the typical sentences were between 6 months and 2 years. The capital offense generates 16 years. With exceptions. If it's a particularly heinous crime, a life sentence is possible, but not normal. So we need to think about alternatives. House arrest, for example, with ankle bracelets that keep you from wandering off. A lot less expensive. You pay the rent. Public service. That could help in the sense of restorative justice. And real fines. Sometimes white-collar crime is better treated with a hefty fine. I'm not talking about a couple of $1,000s. I mean, if you value money, and if that's why you did what you did, well, maybe taking it all away isn't a bad idea. Prison guard training. The prison guards in the United States are given 3 to 5 weeks of training. In Denmark, it's 3 years. It's an academic program. They're taught about the psychology of criminal behavior. They're taught about how to guard themselves, how to manage control groups. All of this is there. But in addition, they're taught to be mentors, they're taught to be helpers, they're taught that people matter, and they are taught how to express that caring. As I watched one of the guards talking to a group, what she was saying was, we're in this together. We're here together. We will do this together. We'll get out of here together. Then there needs to be a post-incarceration engagement, a safety net. Once an American prisoner is released, they're on their own. Good luck, kid. What they don't say is, see you in about 3 years. A safety net in Denmark is the norm. Ultimately, we have to have the political will, and that's the hard part. Because we are so imbued with the idea that what we have is all we're going to get. Even though I have yet to meet a single state legislator who's convinced that we have an operable system, that we have a good system. Every one of them will tell you to your face, no, it's a failed system. It's just that they're unwilling to take the political risk to do anything about it. And we have to assure them that it's okay, take the risk. What do we have to lose? What do we have to lose? There is good news. The director of Corrections and Rehabilitation has made it known to a small group that I'm a part of that he's willing to give us a prison with which to experiment. And I'm flabbergasted. I'm delighted and hope that he will follow through on his promise. He said it's not a new prison, it's an old one. We don't want to rehabilitate it. Interesting choice of words. And I do. I want to go in there with a bulldozer, just take it out and build something very simple and something very livable. There's a larger issue, and that has to do with the socioeconomic argument, and let's not forget about it. It's one that I can't deal with today or in any short passage of time. But there is a perception that those at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder are there permanently. And once they sense that permanence, there's an absence of hope. And they perceive that the rules of the game are made by those in power, and those are the people with money, and those are people with my color. An interesting statistic, blacks constitute 13% of the American population, 40% of the inmate population. Why is that? And is this the first step in a rebellion? I mean, we can rebel in a number of different ways, but breaking the law is one of them. So what if we do nothing? What if we do nothing and just let it alone? Maybe it'll fix itself. And who do we blame if it doesn't? Members of the state legislature are interested in blaming prison guards. But who hired the prison guards? Whose money supports prison guards? Isn't it us, ultimately? And that's what keeps me up at night. We are party to a system that we acknowledge as a failure, and over time we have done very little to correct it. To be sure, there are a number of groups in California who are working hard to mend this broken thing. They don't talk to each other very often, and that's part of the problem, but they're there, and I've been talking to a number of different groups, trying to connect them. And I think whatever we can do to help that connection process will ultimately restore our faith in our own system and help us avoid the likelihood that Pogo was right. We have met the enemy, and he is us.